I choose diversity, because who wants a one-flavor world? Hello friends, so happy to be back and to continue this journey together with you. For those of you who have reached out with feedback, thank you. It's so great to hear your viewpoints. And to the new folks who are just joining us on this episode, please feel free to go back and watch the earlier episodes. And please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions you may have or even criticism. We always welcome constructive dialogue. So you've heard me speak about connectivity quite often. I do so because of my very strong belief that it is the strongest element there is. An element that defines love. Love cannot exist in a void. Nothing can. I often get overwhelmed about the magic that surrounds us. The different kingdoms of existence. The inanimate kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, etc. And the interconnectedness. There is that word again, interconnectedness. That phenomenon, in a way, is the essence of our existence, a phenomena that transcends the physical, binding us to the spiritual or the metaphysical. A universal binding mechanism, binding the seen with the unseen, with that most powerful energy we call love. Okay, speaking of love, let me tell you a story. A love story quite similar to Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Long time ago, a young Arab poet by the name of Qays fell in love with a young girl named Layla, or Leili in Persian. He began to write beautiful love poetry about Leili and would read them out loud everywhere, in the fields, on top of the hills, on street corners, everywhere. These passionate displays of love and devotion caused many to believe he was insane. And they started calling the boy Majnun, literally meaning the madman. One day Majnun found the courage to ask Leili's father for his daughter's hand in marriage. But her father got angry and refused the request. Such marriage, the father explained, would only cause a scandal. Instead, Leili was promised to another man. Majnun was overcome with grief and broken-hearted. He abandoned his home and family and disappeared into the wilderness, where he continued writing poems for his beloved, tracing the words with a long stick on sand, and watched it as the wind blew and took the words with it. He lived a miserable life of solitude amongst wild animals. Meanwhile, Leili was forced to marry another man, although she did not love him, because her heart still belonged to Majnun. She remained a faithful wife to her new husband. Majnun's mother and father missed their son terribly and longed every day for his safe return home. They would leave food for him at various places in the hopes that he would find the food. They also prayed constantly, hoping he would one day come back to them. But Majnun remained in the wilderness. writing his poetry in solitude, never speaking to a single soul. Many years later, Majnun's father and mother both passed away. Knowing of his devotion to his parents, Leili was determined to send word to Majnun of their passing. Eventually, she found an old man who claimed to have seen Majnun in the desert. After much begging and pleading, the old man agreed to pass on a message the next time he set off on his travels. One day, the old man crossed paths with Majnun in the desert. There, he solemnly delivered the news concerning the death of Majnun's parents and witnessed the broken-hearted poet mourn the loss of his parents. Overcome with regret and loss, Majnun decided to live in the desert until his own death. He was often seen by travelers who would pass him on their way towards the city. The travelers said that Majnun spent his days reciting poetry to himself and writing in the sand with that long stick. Some years later, Leili's husband died. The young woman hoped that finally she would be able to be with her true love, that finally she and Majnun would be together forever. But sadly, this was not to be. Tradition demanded that Leili remained in her home alone to grieve for her dead husband for 2 whole years, without seeing another soul. Sadly, though, as tragedy would have it, Leili died alone in her marital home, without ever seeing Majnun again. News reached Majnun, and he rushed to her graveside and died as soon as he saw it. And so the two were buried side by side, their graves becoming a pilgrimage site, a symbol of their reunion, achieved only in their death. The young lovers passed away, but their story lived on. Many forms of the story began to circulate in Arabic, Persian, Turkish, and even Hindi literature. Every version expressing a different aspect of the life and death of the two lovers. In one version, the pair meet in school. In another version, they meet in a field. Some versions spoke of the companionship between Majnun and the wild animals in the desert. Meanwhile, others focused on the love and the love poems he wrote for Leili. Centuries passed until 1188. The Persian poet Naamganjavi wrote his epic poem containing over 4,600 verses. In this epic poem, which was about Leili and Majnun, Nizami replaced the original Arab Bedouin setting with an urban Persian one. And the secondary characters that accompanied the lovers were also changed in Nizami's version. For example, the commoners were replaced with noblemen and poor Bedouins with aristocracy. Nizami collected both secular as well as mystical sources about Majnun and portrayed a vivid picture of the famous lovers. Many other Persian authors, poets, imitated him and wrote their own versions of the romance. But Nizami's work became the most celebrated version of the story, which is why most people are unaware of the fact that Leili and Majnun has its origins in Arabic lore and Arabic parables. Because of Nizami's poem, most people believe that Leili and Majnun were originally Persian. Not that the ethnicities matter, it's just that Nizami's rendition in Persian became much more widely read and admired and translated into more languages than any of the other versions. It's said that if one were to search all existing libraries, one would probably find more than 1,000 versions of the story of Leili and Majnun, but it's Nizami's work and translation that is mostly taken out. Now, our story, much like Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, is a tragedy. But Nizami gave it a happy conclusion by ending it with a friend having a dream. In this dream, the friend sees Leili and Majnun united in their love, living happily ever after in heaven as king and queen. Many would agree that it is a beautiful story, tragic as it may be. But the story is tragic only when looked at from a solely materialistic position. And we know that classical stories such as this one always have a higher mission and relay a higher message. It's never only about physical love. Their love was obviously not a physical form, since they never as much as even held hands. The entire story is a reference to a much deeper, almost sacred love that transcends physical limitations. I mentioned earlier that the story has been told by many in different ways, focusing on different points. Amongst these were Attar, whose story about the Simorgh, the 30 birds I shared in an earlier episode, and of course our beloved Rumi. When recounting the story of the Simorgh, 30 birds, we also covered the 7 valleys that the birds had to travel to attain their goal. A number of mystical poets have written and described the 7 valleys, and so has the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. I mention this because I happen to be a Baha'i, and it just pops to my head when I think of such matters. So you remember that, driven to the point of insanity, Majnun decided to abandon his life and run off. In the 7 valleys of Baha'u'llah, he describes that when Majnun set out in devastation with the belief of never being able to have a glimpse of his beloved, he was confronted with a watchman on the streets who found him suspicious and ran after him. Scared of being caught by the watchman, Majnun felt that his life was about to end and regarded the man as an angel of death, a being who had come to take his life away. So he ran faster and faster in order to escape. He ran and found that the watchman had closed every way. He arrived at a dead end, facing a wall. He didn't know what awaited him on the other side. He thought surely it was death. But in an instant, he decided to jump over the wall anyway. And then, fallen on the ground, he beheld his beloved with a lamp in her hand, searching for a ring she had lost. In awe of his good fortune, he began to pray for the watchman, asking God to bless him. He had taught the man to be the angel of death, seeking his end, but in reality, he had been Angel Gabriel bringing life to him now that he was able to set his eyes upon the face of his beloved. The point here is that should Majnun have seen the end at the beginning, he would have blessed the man and prayed for him from the beginning. But since the end was veiled from him, he lamented his situation and blamed and cursed the watchman in the beginning. I agree that it's a far cry to expect us, mere mortals, to have reached the point of such knowledge as to see the end in the beginning. And of course, there are as many takeaways from the story in each and every one of its versions as there are humans. But one thing is clear to me in the example of the watchman. Even an outwardly seeming enemy may bring us incredible joy and be deserving of our blessings. I'll leave you with this for this week and invite you to ponder on how we're all connected in one way or another. I love you, every one of you, regardless of where you're watching from or who you are or what your background is. That's just what's in my heart. And the reason I do these things is because of that love I hold so dearly in my heart. Remember, one world, one family. Thank you. Bye.